All right, so for this video, we're going to talk a little bit about one specific class of drugs, antidepressants. So this first part is a little bit more about that part of a talk that I gave at one point, trying to give a more general audience some information about antidepressants. And a big thing is, and this has become less so as people have taken them and seen that they work, but it is a point that I want to make clear that antidepressants are not a magic bullet, but we do definitely have good evidence that it works, right? So this is just sort of pictorially showing you the idea that they gave, you know, this isn't 100 people, but that's how it's recorded. But if you gave 100 people um, antidepressants, about 20 to 40 people would see improvement in their depression just by giving placebo, right? The drug that we know doesn't work. It doesn't do anything, right? Um, Whereas 40 to 60 people, right, 40 to 60% of people would see improvement um, with that actual antidepressant. And this is always confused because this is actually this placebo effect where people given a placebo alone see this improvement is actually a pretty high placebo, right? So this has always confused people a little bit, but also the general idea is the effect is maybe not as obvious. And a big, I think, mistake a lot of people make is thinking that, it's all in your head with depression and that there's nothing you can do, you just have to learn how to get over it. Hopefully, and I find this with sort of your generation, this is less of the way of thinking, but, it is treatable. Depression is a medical condition. And in general, part of a bigger point. I don't think we should think of mental health necessarily as separate from health, right? Mental health is your health, and it is part of your biology, and we do have treatments that work to a degree, right? We have very few magic bullets for any disease, but this is something we know works, and they've gotten better over time. So there are sort of four major classes of antidepressants, and this is going from sort of newest to oldest. So SSRIs, the ones you probably hear the most about, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Before that was serotonin and norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors, and then tricyclics and MAOIs. And we'll talk about all of these a little bit. Now, the sort of key here is that they get more specific as they get newer, which is good, and from the terms of they tend to have fewer side effects than newer ones. That being said, all of these are still used in different cases. And because we don't 100% understand the sort of physiology of depression, there's a little bit of a trial and error usually trying to find the one that works for a specific person. So that initial data I showed you is from studies like these where they looked at, people have done numerous studies. This is looking at a little over a dozen different studies at using antidepressants. And so, each one of these studies probably did a few hundred people, and we can combine all of them in what's called a meta-analysis, where you combine multiple papers and get an even stronger analysis. So that's what they're showing here, is this idea that in every case, there's a stronger drug effect than placebo effect. Some of these is much more minor, some of these much more major. But if you add this up, you see that it is a significant effect, and that's true for both SSRIs. It seems to even be a little bit stronger over SNRIs. And getting back to the point that mental health is health, we don't always think about it this way, and it's a fairly serious topic, but for people under 35, besides unintentional injury, suicide is the leading cause of death, right? And those, I think, in large amount, are preventable deaths. We just have to be better at detecting and treating these people. And those treatments may not always mean antidepressants or drugs, but certainly that is one of the tools that we should take very seriously. All right, so this diagram sort of nicely summarizes how all the main classes work, showing you a few different synapses, right? So this is a acetylcholine synapse, serotonin. You'll see this quite a bit. The abbreviation for serotonin, because of its chemical structure, is actually 5-HT. So if you see 5-HT, just think serotonin. And then in here, green is noradrenaline. or norepinephrine, are the symptoms, right? So how do these different ones work? Let's take one at a time here. So the main idea here is, right, serotonin released from these vesicles should bind to a neurotransmitter receptor for serotonin on the postsynaptic cell, and then at some point get taken back up. And right here we're showing you a serotonin reuptake channel, right, or pump. And it's pumping it back in. And what the SSRIs do is they inhibit this pump, so serotonin stays around longer, right? Same idea with the serotonin SNRIs, right, the serotonin norepinephrine inhibitor, except for they also inhibit this pump, the noradrenaline or norepinephrine pump, keeping more of both of these around. Tricyclics work in a different way, in that they are interacting with the postsynaptic neurotransmitters in ways that can actually affect those pathways differently, in that they're both can inhibit and activate different classes of receptors. And then also MAOIs are, right, the I stands for inhibitor, and this is a channel called, or protein called MAO. And what it does is once these are taken back up, this is the channel that breaks them back down. So a certain number of these serotonin or norepinephrine that's taken up will be broken back down. And if we inhibit this breakdown process, we leave more of these around in the presynaptic cell and sort of increase the activity. So, side effects, right? That's what I told you is the main difference, right? And if we start with some of the older ones, MAOI or monoamine oxidase inhibitors, right? And I'm not going to go through them, but I think we can just sort of very specifically see that these is a long list of side effects, similar down here with the tricyclates, and even bigger list, compared to the norepinephrine serotonin inhibitors and the serotonin selective inhibitors. And if you also compare about these are, no side effects are enjoyable usually, right? There wouldn't be a side effect, it would just be an effect then. But these are generally more minor, right? As opposed to hypertensive crisis, right? Things like that can be, more life-threatening, right? Let's see if there's any, right? There's a lot of cardiac issues in general with the other ones. And so those have to be more carefully monitored. So how do we get to SSRIs? This is a brief history, and it should also, I think, gives you an idea of how drugs work. So serendipity, I don't actually know how to understand, but Proronizad was being tested to treat tuberculosis in the 50s. And doctors noted that, it was maybe working okay. It was not clear if it was working for tuberculosis, but the people seemed happier, so that's something, right? And then later they realized, this is what this Proronizad was doing, is that it inhibits the monoamine oxidase inhibitor. Or it is one of those, right? So once they knew what MAOI did, they knew it could degrade serotonin, so that made them think that this idea that, serotonin must be a key in making people happy, right? This is, I feel like I see the shirts around. I think our neuroscience club may have made shirts that, just have like the serotonin molecule. I would push back a little bit on the idea that serotonin is the happy molecule. It's pretty clear it's involved, but I actually think that dopamine is more often the happy molecule, but it's obviously some combination of the two. But anyways, so that implicated serotonin. People began to focus more on that, and as they went along, they created drugs that more specifically sort of boosted serotonin and the serotonin systems, more specifically, so it would have fewer effects, or off-target effects or something. All right. So I'd like to show, this is an older commercial for Wellbutrin, I believe. I'll just let this play. It sort of walks through, though, how
you may feel sad,
Wellbutrin is. You know what? I think I have to turn the volume up. So.
in things you once loved. You may feel anxious, can't even sleep. Your daily activities and relationships suffer. You know when you just don't feel right. Now here's something you may not know. These are some symptoms of depression, a serious medical condition affecting over 20 million Americans. While the cause is unknown, depression may be related to an imbalance of naturally occurring chemicals between nerve cells in the brain.
So honestly, not sure how well the sound is coming across. Hopefully it does. But if it doesn't, this is the key part I wanted to talk about. Is this idea that it's a due to a chemical imbalance, and I guess it was Zoloft, not Wellbutrin that we're looking at here. And the idea that basically not enough serotonin is making it across. So this is how they work here.
Zoloft, a prescription medicine, works to correct this imbalance. When you know more about what's wrong, you can help make it right. Only your doctor can diagnose depression. Zoloft is not for everyone. People taking medicines called MAOI shouldn't take Zoloft. Side effects may include dry mouth, insomnia, sexual side effects, diarrhea, nausea, and sleepiness. Zoloft is not habit-forming. Talk to your doctor about Zoloft, the #1 prescribed brand of its kind. Zoloft. When you know more about what's wrong, you can help make it right. You know when...
Right. So if we were in class, I would ask this question, right? So how many had heard this idea that depression is caused by a chemical imbalance? I think this is true for most people, and it's because this was actually stated here. I would say this is generally wrong, actually. People are surprised to hear that. This is how they work in general, right? This idea that, you're not releasing or that basically by blocking the reuptake of serotonin, you overactivate the serotonin synapses. That part is true. The fact that that you're not producing enough serotonin or that blocking it is much sketchy, right? This comes from like the initial findings on that other drug, right? That made sense. And they did find some early studies that people who had depression had lower blood levels of serotonin, but that's not actually been reproduced. And there really isn't any clear science to say people with depression have sort of weak or fewer or less serotonin synapses. That may end up being true, but that doesn't seem to be the whole case. And here's the big reason why. So here, maximum antidepressant effects occur at 6 to 8 weeks. This effect, when you take Zoloft or any antidepressant or any SSRI, this occurs 4 to 6 hours after the first dose. This effect on the synapse. So that should tell you that it's not just we need to rebalance your synapses, right? There's something more that needs to be happening, right? Why does that happen? Now, the short answer is we don't 100% know, but we have some ideas, right? Right. So one thing that seems to be true, and I would say that Prozac is the one that almost always gets used, or fluoxetine, in all these studies. That's the one that's been the best studied. I think it's because it's the one that went generic at first, so it was cheap to get. It's also highly prescribed, so it makes sense to study, right? So by changing how active these synapses are, we actually can permanently change their synaptic strength. This is one of the sort of hypotheses of it, right? So it's showing here the idea that you give an SSRI, and now all of a sudden there's a bunch more neurotransmitter receptors that start forming on the other end. It makes this synapse stronger, and they can show this here that they stimulate this presynaptic neuron at the top, and then initially they get this sort of meager little voltage response in the postsynaptic neuron, and after fluoxetine treatment they can get a much bigger treatment response, right? So that seems to be one possible thing. We can, if we remember these things like dendritic spines, there's been evidence that antidepressants can physically rewire the brain, sort of changing the number, shape, and size of these dendritic spines, and that that certainly must be coming through this putting out additional serotonin, but that may not. That's maybe like a sort of side effect. So I guess this used to be a thing I heard, and I find students less and less don't remember this, but I was always told that by the time you're a teenager or something like that, you have all the brain cells that you'll ever have. And from that on, we just need to protect them, and they're just slowly dying. And that is sort of true. But we're finding it's not 100% true. and this has an implication here. In certain parts of your brain, um, so one that we know for sure is that your olfactory bulb, right? That those neurons can regenerate, and that's part of your central nervous system, and they can make more of those, and that's constantly happening. But another part is in your granule cell layer, which is sort of near the hippocampus. There seems to be, and we know this is definitely true in almost all mouse, rats, monkeys, and we have some studies, but they're very difficult to do in humans that indicate this is true as well. And actually, you have to use like random cases where people were given um, cancer drugs that allowed us to track uh, development of cells, and then happened to die because of cancer, and then they could look at their brains, right? But it's hard to look at this people's adult brains for increased number of cells. But anyways, point being, there seems to be good evidence this is true, that in this part of the brain we can still make new neurons, even well into adulthood. And then if we take that as true for humans, the thing we have never done, but we see in sort of mice for sure, is that if we treat with SSRIs, we actually see an increase in this, that we see more new neurons that are formed in mice that are treated with this in this particular area, and that they can become more mature, and they can help rewire the brain, right? So if we go back to this, I do want to hedge my bet a little bit. So mood changes take 6 to 8 weeks. That's what we're normally looking for. Somebody would describe themselves as they would, when tested, show up as less depressed based on mood changes. But emotional responses change sooner. So what I mean mood versus emotion. A mood is sort of the overall how you feel, right? Whereas an emotional response might be maybe something normally really irritates you, but now it only slightly irritates you. Or like maybe if somebody cut you off with their car, you would just be a wreck from that. But now you can handle that a little bit, right? Those things happen early. So that does mean something is happening quicker, but with these big long-term changes, they take longer, right? Additionally, we definitely know this, that talk therapy combined with antidepressants have an additive effect, and a synergistic effect actually, where like the combined is much more than just taking the two separately, and so that indicates that the idea that SSRIs may put your brain in a spot in which it's sort of better able to heal in a way that it's sort of better able to learn how to be happy, or how to respond to the world around it better. So this is the big point to me, is that, and some people find this scary, but I find this encouraging, right? So I think the big thing, if you went through all those, is that SSRIs, they are they are changing that chemical balance, but it doesn't mean that this chemical imbalance was necessarily the problem. What they seem to do is enable physical changes to your brain, rewiring of your brain in different ways, making new neurons, making new synapses, changing synapses in ways that sort of allow your brain to wire that it's more capable of being happy, right? One big thought is that antidepressants sort of, we're all sort of locked into position, and antidepressants sort of relax things so that you can more easily put them back in a way that's healthy, right? So that's the idea. So this term is called plasticity, and the idea is the ability to make changes to your brain is called plasticity, and the idea is that antidepressants might put your brain in a more plastic, a more pliable situation. All right. So this isn't so new anymore. It was new when I put this slide in here 2 years ago, but it's still pretty new in that coming. That's the idea of using ketamine as an antidepressant. We've heard of ketamine before. It's maybe most likely as a recreational drug, but it is used as a anesthetic drug. It's actually common used in veterinary medicine. It's a horse tranquilizer, literally. It's a very strong drug. Very recently, and this is February 2019, it was approved. I need to update that by the FDA to treat resistant depression. Depression, I think the way it is right now, you have to have tried 3 other antidepressants before you're allowed to use ketamine, because it is pretty serious stuff. Um, Here's the thing that's exciting about this. As opposed to taking 6 to 8 weeks to see an effect, it has an immediate, long-lasting effect in many people, not everybody, after 1 treatment. 1 dose, the effect, they've had people, usually weeks to months. I think months, like a couple months is sort of the norm. And certain people, that's been it. 1 dose, and they've gone years without further treatment, without further um, drug treatments needed. So I think usually you have to stay in therapy because this is for people that have very serious depression, right? How we really don't understand. We thought we have a pretty good understanding of what ketamine does. We don't really understand why it affects depression. So it affects glutamate, not serotonin, so completely different. And it actually seems to inhibit the most common glutamate receptor, and how that affects depression is not clear, because glutamate is used all over the place in this particular receptor. More recently, people have been making alternative versions of ketamine that have sort of get rid of the side effects, of which basically the reason for using it, the recreational drug use. People on this will hallucinate and they'll have an extreme high, and basically they're trying to get rid of that part to keep the antidepressant part. And there's actually been quite a bit of work, actually by a startup company just down in northern Illinois, who was purchased, I think, about a year ago for their drug to do that. So I would keep this on the radar to see if this becomes a more common treatment going forward. Right. I don't think I want to talk about this. We'll save this for later because I think it's interesting, but with their exam out, I don't feel like picking up a new topic right now. So I hope that we got everything across that you need for exam. If you have any questions, let me know. Thanks.